Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Relay Podcast. Today we have an amazing guest today, the one and only Shaykh Joe Bradford. Just to give a quick little bio of who he is and what we're going to be speaking about. Shaykh Joe Bradford is a seasoned entrepreneur and a well-known American scholar of Islam with over 20 years of experience studying and working on issues related to Islamic law, Islamic thought, business, and finance. He holds two master's degrees, one in Islamic judiciary process and the other in Islamic capital markets. He currently is a PhD candidate at the International Islamic University of Malaysia, working on issues related to injustice and wealth. And he served as vice president and senior Sharia consultant for Al Rajhi Bank, the largest Islamic bank in the Middle East. Today's Chef Joe is a sought after ethical finance advisor, offering his expertise to individuals and institutions around the world. As a co-founder of MyWassiyah.com, Chef Joe has leveraged his extensive knowledge of Islamic inheritance to create a world-class product that bridges the gap between traditional Islamic knowledge and the requirements of the U.S. legal system. And we'll be speaking a little bit more about that later, inshallah. And he has also served as a Sharia advisor for Zoya Finance, helping to bring halal investing to life by developing an app that allows users to build and monitor Sharia-compliant investment portfolios with confidence and clarity. Without further ado, it is my honor to welcome Shaykh Joe Bradford to the podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Great to be here.
Amazing, alhamdulillah. So we'll just jump right in with some of the questions that we have planned for today. Since Relay is a very convert-based organization, and, you know, as we all know, Shaykh, you did convert to Islam a long time ago, and with your extensive experience in that realm, what made Islamic appealing to you? Can you describe what the moments leading to your Shahada was like? And are there any stories you'd like to tell about your coming to Islam?
Yeah, so as far as what made Islam appealing to me, as appealing as Islam can be to a 14-year-old, I found that it was the simplicity of belief. So I had been going to church with neighbors and had always been involved, and interested in world history and religious history, reading the Bible, those types of things. And what I found is that as a young man, there wasn't a lot of clarity for me as far as personal regimen, and how I should act, and how I should be expected to act in society. And as far as belief, there wasn't a lot of clarity as far as, what I should believe and what it means to believe. The Trinity was obviously something that was part and parcel of going to church and of the beliefs of the church, but it didn't make sense to me. And it didn't seem that whatever I was exposed to really had enough outside of just following general culture to help me improve myself. So what appealed to me most about Islam was the simplicity of belief. God is one. He sends messengers. You should follow those messengers as they're the ones who know what God wants. And after that, you need to do a few basic things to stay on track and have good character. That simple message was extremely appealing to me, something that really resonated with me from the very beginning. And that I essentially took to heart. So after about a year of reading on and off from, getting books from the school library, public library, and all of that, I then showed up at the mosque one Sunday morning and was ready to take my Shahada. The moments leading up to that, it's hard to say. Like, I think a lot of times when we talk about people accepting Islam and conversion stories, there's a tendency to want to hear like all of the fantastic things that happened or the kind of mystical, magical things that happened. And for me, it was never like that. It was a process of, a year or more of reading and investigating, trying to find people to talk to, which was very difficult at that time. And trying to find material that I could trust was also very difficult. So nowadays it's much different. But I would say that there was a bit of, culture shock in kind of what my expectations of coming to the mosque were and what they turned out to be. And so I had really only known whatever I had read in books, and really didn't know if I was, what to expect when I got there. But I found the facilitating for me. My shahada and kind of, coaching me into Islam. I remember there was one brother, we sat for, he was, mashallah, he was very talkative. And I'm sitting on a couch in the hallway in the masjid, and he kept, trying to tell me the details of every story of every prophet in the Quran. And I got so frustrated. I said, "Excuse me, sir, I don't mean to be rude, but I grew up a Christian. I went to Vacation Bible School. I probably know these stories better than you. So can I just become Muslim now, or like, what's the deal?" And he goes, "Oh, you're okay with that?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm not here to ask questions. I'm here to actually do the deed, to actually get it done." He's like, "Oh, wonderful." So he goes and he goes to the imam's office and talks to him. And then, took shahada there after Salat al-Dhuhr that day. It was, I think I was the very first young American man to ever come to the mosque and accept Islam, of my age. I think they had people in maybe in their 20s and 30s before, but nobody in their teens. And I remember after saying the shahada, an older Syrian sister, may Allah have mercy on her, Ayman. I know her now, but she passed a few years ago. Her son was prominent in the mosque. And she came from the back of the musalla, because everyone prayed in one musalla. She came from the back of the musalla and was just like crying and what I thought was yelling at me in a foreign language. And her son walked up, and he said, "This is my mother." I said, "Please apologize to her. I didn't mean to upset her or offend her in any way. I apologize if I've done anything, And he goes, "No, you're misunderstanding. She's just so happy. She literally got here a week ago from Syria, and you're the very first person in her entire life." She's in her 50s. The very first person that she's ever seen accept Islam. So that was always a touching thing to see. I always make dua for her. She was very, mashallah, very a pillar in the community until she passed.
SubhanAllah, what a beautiful experience. A week into America, mashallah. I have a question regarding that experience with the brother that was giving you a lot of information about all the prophets, and your response saying that I probably know these prophets better than you, and let me just take my shahada. What advice do you have for people that are looking into Islam and they have this way of thinking that maybe I should look into everything before I convert? Where is the threshold before you should just make that leap into faith?
Yeah, that's a great question. I usually tell people that are interested in Islam that when you are applying for school, when you're applying for a job, if you're going to go and apply to college, you're not going to go to college, attend all of the classes, read all of the books, take all of the tests, and then go to the admissions and sign up. You're going to know enough that says that this program's for you, and then you're going to sign up and start the program. And so for people accepting Islam, it's very much the same. If you know enough about it, and you're encouraged that this is the right thing to do, you don't need to know everything before you become Muslim. And there's also something that I think is really important to point out, and that is that Islam as a faith has certain imperatives. Those imperatives are many. So there's a social imperative, there's a political imperative, there's a religious practice imperative, there's a theological imperative. Everything in Islam is subordinate to its theological imperative, and that is that you worship God alone and that you follow his prophet, who he sent with the truth. Everything else comes secondary. So a lot of people will hear about Islam because of, say, political events, and they can be dismayed, like, oh, well, why would I become Muslim? Because, just everything in the Middle East is so crazy. Or, the social imperative. Some people want to become Muslim because of, the socialization amongst Muslims. And then they find out that, there's actual, when you're inside the community, it can be very different than when you're outside of the community. And they don't really understand the theology. And so that becomes a tripping point. So, all of these imperatives can either be enticing or off-putting at some times because of the way the world works. But if you're convinced of the theological imperative, that's really the only thing that matters in the end of the day. And that's the thing that you should look into. So if you believe that, yes, God is one and Muhammad is his messenger, just become a Muslim. And then everything else after that is essentially, up to your practice and your dedication and your learning. Don't try to do it all at once. And then allow yourself to kind of take time and graduate through the University of Islam.
So the community around you when you did convert, how supportive were they, and how did convert care or even the lack thereof impact your Islam?
Yeah, so there wasn't really something called convert care at that time. People accepting Islam was not the norm. There were, I think, only a handful of converts in our community. There was a brother named Adam, who I remember, meeting. There was a brother named Dan, older brother, who, mashallah, I bought his memoirs the other day. He was a very interesting individual. But yeah, there were a few sisters that accept Islam, but there weren't, it wasn't like, there wasn't critical mass for somebody to even say, yeah, we need to do something for them. So I literally was just put into Sunday school. I would attend Sunday school, learning how to read and write and pray and all of that. And I would come during the week, and there was a brother named Musaddiq, may Allah have mercy on him, who was a journeyman electrician, and he moved to town on a project. And he saw me at the masjid. I was making some mistakes in my prayer. I had a haircut that he said was, unsavory. And, he told me, he said, you got one of them old hipster haircuts. You gotta go cut your hair. Stop wearing your baseball caps to the masjid. And so he sat with the imam, Dr. Zulfikar Shah, and said, listen, we want you to teach, we want you to teach us. And we need to kind of like move things forward. Like, just coming on Sundays is not enough. And so the Imam, Jazallah Khair, he actually, may Allah reward him. He actually would sit with us 2-3 nights a week. And we went through prayer, all the 5 pillars of Islam. And he, mashallah, put a lot of time and effort. He's, constantly in my dua. I'm still in contact with him till today. He now lives in Wisconsin, with the Fiqh Council of North America now. But he put a lot of effort into selecting books for me to read that would be key in developing a sense of Islam as a practice faith. So it wasn't just, here are the 5 pillars, do this, but, he had me read a book like, Sayyid Hussein Nasr's A Young Muslim's Guide to the Modern World, which is, a book that tackles a lot of ideology that you're faced with in school that you might not even think has kind of ramifications for your own Islamic theology and what you believe as a Muslim. The Fiqh of Priorities was another book that he kind of assigned me to read. I remember there was a series in Hanafi fiqh that we read through, and a number of other books. So I'm very indebted to him that he took the time to teach me. After that, he saw that I had a knack for Arabic language. I had learned to read and write very quickly. So he said, okay, well, if you can read and write now, I'm going to teach you morphology. I'm going to teach you sarf, how to deal with verbs. Let's get you a phrase book and a dictionary, and you seem to want to do this. So, he put that time in to teach me the basics of Arabic as well. So I think with convert care, what I've seen is that when there's someone who cares enough, right? They genuinely care about you, wanting to learn the faith. They're not looking to fetishize you. They're not looking to put you on a pedestal, to have you as a token, but they really want you to stand on your own 2 feet as a Muslim. That can have the greatest impact on someone's Islam. The idea that, and then this is something that I warn people that accept Islam from, and people that are in Muslim communities as well, in dealing with converts, is stop making the person who accepted Islam think that their only worth is telling their conversion story ad nauseum. Like, there's so much more that they have to offer, and so much more growth that they have to go through, that when you make it only about, brother, tell us what your conversion story is. Sister, tell us what your conversion story is. I remember one African-American sister years ago, I was really impressed by her reaction. Somebody said, tell us about your conversion story. And she said, no, I won't. That's a very private thing for me. And I'm going to keep it private. But I'm happy to be part of the community. And I think that type of attitude needs to be normalized, so that we don't have people who, and I've seen this myself, we don't have people who've been Muslim for 10 years and they barely know the Fatiha, because the only thing that the Muslim community does when they interact with them is fetishize them.
Right. What do you think converts need the most as a community leader yourself now? And how would a convert approach finding a teacher to provide them the knowledge and the guidance needed to further their Islam?
Yeah, so I would say what converts need the most is a stable source of resources to learn about the basics of Islam, to learn about Islam in a, how can I say this? To learn about Islam in a dispute agnostic environment. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, well, not say unfortunately, but there are many Muslims who are religious, and their religious fervor is also backed by a certain social or ideological fervor. They are motivated by a group that they ascribe to, or by a social movement that they're part of, and they tend to want to make the convert the proxy for their theological, ideological, legal, and social disputes and debates. And so you'll have a person who's only been Muslim a year, asking questions or talking about things in public, like, so what is the first priority when a person, wants to accept faith? Is it that they have gnosis and knowledge, or is it that they're skeptical and that they search, or and they're kind of going into, like, theological rhetoric and philosophy and things that are unnecessary for learning the basics of faith. And those discussions may have a place at a higher level of learning, but you can't expect the convert to become your proxy for, even converts now are discussing this, shows that we're true and we're on the right path and we're the ones that should be listened to. And this is across the ideological boards amongst the Muslim community. I think the general community of Muslims doesn't bother themselves with this, and we should not expect converts to kind of pick up those banners and wave them for us as well. So what they need is kind of dispute agnostic, general Islam that can be facilitated to them by someone who is caring and understands what they're going through. If it is a convert that can do that in their community, that is best. And if it's not, it should be someone who has a long-standing relationship with people that have accepted Islam and is generally a compassionate and empathetic person. Because when you don't have that, you can many times have people kind of presenting Islam to them as, you need to get on we're the program. You need to get on with us. Instead of, we're trying to give you the information about Islam that will empower you to be a Muslim on your own. So yes, Islam is a community religion, right? But it's also a religion of individual faith and responsibility. So as a faith of individual responsibility, every individual has their responsibility to know what they're obligated to believe and to do, and then to actually practice those things. And those beliefs and practice are bolstered through community interaction, but the community interaction is not essential. So what happens is when you normalize only having externalizing conversations of community interaction and debate and dialogue without inculcating a sense of personal responsibility for one's own faith, piety, and action in front of God, then when the social connections break down or that person moves somewhere else, they don't know how to function as a Muslim on their own. And that can cause a crisis of faith. When they come across people that they don't like or that don't like them, it can cause a crisis of faith because you've inculcated into them the idea that, as Muslims, we all like each other. As Muslims, we all get along. As Muslims, and yes, while that isn't ideal, that's not the reality. And there are some people that you're just not going to get along with. And you can be brothers with them and sisters with them, but you don't have to be best friends, and you don't have to kind of kowtow to what people's expectations are you because you're the Muslim stepchild. So, having somebody that can give, debate agnostic, general information about Islam related to faith and practice in a caring, compassionate, and empathetic environment that the person can then identify with, I believe is what should be happening with convert care. And there are a few programs around the States now that do that. I'm happy to see.
Gotcha. Sheikh, how would a convert new to Islam look for that teacher or that guide in their journey through Islam?
I think personal. I think people just kind of clicking with each other is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can have a personal relationship and you get along with the person that you're trying to learn from, that's excellent. Being a realist, that's not always what happens. And so back to that university example, converts need to realize that, and I say converts, and I'm sure that somebody's going to bring up this like tired convert revert thing. We're just using terms that everybody uses, right? It's a needless distinction. When we say any of these words, we mean people who have accepted Islam. But you need to, as a person who has accepted Islam, you need to also understand that not everyone you meet you're necessarily going to like, but everyone you can learn from. And so decide what it is you want to learn from them and how you can benefit from them. And you might benefit from their bad behavior or their rudeness or what you don't like about them. And you say, that's kind of like antithetical to what I want to be as a Muslim. I'm not going to do that. Or you can say, they might be a bit harsh or a bit loopy or a bit whatever, but they've got knowledge of X, and I'm going to benefit as much as I can. So in finding that teacher, if you can click, great. If you can't, then don't say to yourself that there's no resources out there. Learning takes humility. If the only resource that you have is a person who might character might not be to your liking, or even let's say, for example, they have an accent, and it can be difficult to understand. I haven't found this complaint from converts a lot, but in Muslim communities, people always say, oh, the imams and the khatibs and the accents and this and this and that. You know what? That person's up there giving the khutbah and you're not. That person's putting in the effort and you're not. If you don't like that, put in the effort to learn as much as they did, and then you, with your clear English, can go and do the same thing. But the idea that your teacher has to be perfect before you learn from them is erroneous and has to be left off. So if you accepted Islam, I would say look at three things. Look at a person's, if you can find a person who has credentials, either that they've been living and teaching in a community for a very long time. That's one, or that they have, they've studied formally and they can clearly say to you what they've studied. That's one. So it's either the education or the experience. Number two, that you see that there are people who are dedicated to the idea of Islam. You don't find them being overly negative about Islam and Muslims, and they're dedicated to the basics of Islam that everyone knows, meaning like they pray, they fast, and then you want to look at their acts of worship and see what kind of feeling you get from that. And number three is their character. They exhibit good character, and they have maybe they'll exhibit good character in everything, but there are things about their character that you can tune into. Then you've definitely, if you can find all three there, then you've definitely found someone that you can learn.
I think the point you were making about being overly critical of our scholars or our khatibs with their their accents or maybe the errors in their mannerisms that we pick up because they are humans, it's something that we see a lot now with everyone kind of having a voice, and especially on Twitter, as you know, Shaykh Joe. A lot of people are overly critical of the Muslim community. Do you think that is one of the main crises of faith that a convert may go through once they see that division, once they see Muslims bashing each other, once they see that it may not be this perfect community, and that may be a reason for why they converted in the first place? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that a lot of this is going to depend upon the type of community and people that a person was in contact with before Islam. If a person was socially isolated and maybe, had not gone to church or synagogue or, civic centers or is involved in any kind of social problems, they're going to see the quirks of socialization as negatives. I can tell you, as somebody who grew up, going to some extracurriculars, going to church and things like that, that Muslims really feel like the problems of the community are endemic and kind of, indicative of the problems with them as Muslims, or even sometimes with Islam itself. And they're really just human problems. You'll find them in every single congregation, every single civic organization, any place where people are socialized together. These difficulties will show up. So if a person wasn't well socialized before Islam, that might be challenging for them. If they were, then it might not be the best, the biggest deal for them. But one thing that's very, very important for people who have accepted Islam and people who are, raised in Muslim families alike is to stop the kind of self-loathing attitude of, woe is us, we are oppressed, we are horrible, we are this, we are that. That type of attitude and negative emotional energy does really nothing to allow you to blossom in your faith, or to be dedicated to anything, really, because you're always looking at yourself through a lens of being less than. And so, it doesn't mean that you don't recognize that there are challenges and sometimes attacks on your faith, but that is not from within and from without. But that's not indicative of what your personal conviction is. So when you internalize those attitudes, that starts to affect your personal conviction. And so it's important to not allow the mind chatter to overtake, and instead to say, okay, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Let me concentrate on that, because Allah's promised me that good's going to come about when I focus on that.
Gotcha. That's an amazing point to keep in mind. What are some prophetic examples of Rasulullah nurturing the faith of new Muslims coming into Islam?
I mean, I think that there are a number of them. I think it's really important to realize that the Prophet ﷺ would deal with people on their own level. And so the person who was maybe a, metropolitan kind of egalitarian city dweller would not be dealt with in the same way that a person was, coming out of the desert and from a harsher environment. That he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would, give people advice that was pertinent to where they were in their faith and their practice. For example, Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to his sister Hafsa, the Prophet's wife Hafsa, and Abdullah ibn Umar's sister, he said that, Abdullah ibn Umar would be a great man if only he prayed at night. And, there were reasons for him saying this, which were based upon his observations of what Abdullah needed to get to the next level of spiritual practice and the next level of dedication in his faith. So I think being around people, so there's two things here, is nurturing faith doesn't happen by always being encouraged. If you are someone who has accepted Islam, please take my advice wholeheartedly. If you're around people that are only telling you that you're great, they are not sincere. You need somebody who can tell you where you're faltering and where you need to improve, just as they can praise you for the good that you're doing. And we see that this example, all throughout the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He would praise people for the good that they're doing, but he would also censure them at times, either directly or indirectly, in order to get them to the next level. So having people around you that can be honest without being jarring and can be straightforward without being rude, I think is really important.
Gotcha. That's amazing advice, mashallah. So I want to pivot to talking about one of the projects that you are a part of and you did co-found, MyWassiyah, and the importance of writing an Islamic will. Could you just talk more about what MyWassiyah is and why it's so important?
Yeah, so MyWassiyah is as a project that was founded by myself and Muhammad Bataina of Florida, who's a corporate and estate planning attorney in Florida and California. And it was born out of necessity. Essentially, he as an attorney would be approached by people in the community that would want a will, and they would want it to reflect their values as a Muslim. But he would say, hey, I'm not a sheikh. I can draft a will, but you have to tell me what's in it. And people would come to me and they would say, hey, we want a will. We want you, we want it to be Islamic. And I would say, well, I can tell you what goes in it, but I can't draft it according to legal, the legal stipulations in the state you live in. So what we did was we said, we started to survey all of the different services that were out there. And there was unfortunately a lot of people who were taking a lot of money to do this, and unnecessarily so. So we said to ourselves, why don't we build a one-size-fits-most product for the community? Meaning that most Muslims need an affordable solution to get a will that is Islamically valid and legally valid in the state that they live in. And so we went on a 3-year use case study. We gathered all the information that we could. We built the product from the ground up. It's not a template or, fill in the blanks. You answer an online interview. about yourself, your family, your wealth, the state that you live in. We take those answers, the state's probate laws, which are the laws for inheritance, and then we take the Islamic rules of inheritance, and we have them created into a custom document for you on the back end, which you can then sign in the presence of witnesses, and now you have a legally valid Sharia compliant will. And so the two things here are accessibility and kind of what we coined as democratization of access. Like, we're not asking people to make the decision on their own, but we're giving them access to being able to have this knowledge and implement it. So accessibility is one big part of that. Affordability is another. And the importance of writing a will, I'd say, especially because this is focused on people who've accepted Islam. If you don't have a will in the United States, then one of two things is going to happen. If you have family members, they are going to decide what happens to your body, which means you might not be buried as a Muslim. And the state is going to decide what happens to your money, which means that if you have relatives, you're not going to be leaving them much. A lot of it will be eaten up by fees and costs. And then whatever is left over will go to who the state says it goes to, not according to the rules of Islamic inheritance in the Quran. So as a Muslim, we have the obligation to write a will and have it with us at all times. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, it's narrated in Sahih al-Bukhari, ما ينبغي لمؤمن أو ما ينبغي لمسلم أن يبيت ليلتين إلا ووصيته مكتوبة عنده عنده ما يوصي به إلا ووصيته مكتوبة عنده. It's not befitting for a Muslim to sleep for 2 nights, possessing what he can give away, except that his will is written and with him. And I know of a number of different, actually we had a case here in the city where a brother accepted Islam. He wasn't known to have any family in the area. And when he was working for one of the brothers, very dedicated brother. And when he passed away, the Islamic Society just, said, oh, well, he's Muslim, our brother, we're going to bury him and all of that. And somehow his body was released to his employer. He was then, buried as a Muslim. I think a week or 2 weeks later, his non-Muslim family came from some small little town far off in the middle of Texas and said, hey, what is this that we hear about our son, our brother, whomever, having passed away? They sued the Islamic Society, they sued the funeral home, they sued the city, and that all could have been avoided if, there's just 2-3 page document of a will that said, when I pass away, I give the Islamic Society wherever I'm living the right to take my body and to bury it. So even if you don't have money, and this is the thing that a lot of people don't think of, they say, oh, well, I don't have that much money, so it won't really matter. No, it does matter in a lot of things more than money. And number one is, how are you going to be buried, and what kind of funeral is going to be carried out for you? That's an imperative. So yeah, I mean, alhamdulillah, we bootstrapped it. We've been in the black ever since. We provided this essential service, from I think 2014 now, and we're very, very happy, alhamdulillah, with being able to provide the community the service. A few people have already had their wills probated, meaning they've already gone through the courts, and we were able to, especially during the pandemic, there's a lot of people that were able to utilize the service. It's fast, it's easy, it's affordable, and we wanted to create something that's easy and accessible for the community instead of being expensive and complicated. And alhamdulillah, I think we were able to do that.
Inshallah, we can all act on that and get to working on creating our Islamic wills. One final question to end off the podcast. Jazakallah khair, Shaykh Joe, for your time and your much needed wisdom. We just asked this question to every one of our guests before we close off. So Relay is an organization seeking to empower converts, foreign Muslims, and the community as a whole through essential Islamic resources and content. we want to echo the saying of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, convey from me even a single verse. Relay is also inspired by the concept of a relay race. That's where we got our name. A team working together to complete a difficult task. So if you were to picture a relay race where you pass on the little baton to the next person, or you receive a baton from the previous person, which Islamic figures would you want to have on your relay race team? And it can be from any perspective, but probably from a da'wah perspective, since this is the theme of the episode.
Yeah, this is a very, very interesting question, because my mind kind of goes all over the place. I think I would want to have somebody like maybe like Alexander Russell Webb, if you've heard of him.
Please educate me.
He was an ambassador of the United States to the Philippines who accepted Islam in the 1800s. And then he came to the United States and he started one of the very first Dawah organizations. And so I think, somebody like him, he was a contemporary of Mark Twain, to give you an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Twain actually mentions him when Mark Twain jokes about Missouri Muslims in Tom Sawyer. He's poking fun at Alexander Webb. They were friends. It wasn't a malicious thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say him. I would like to have on the relay race the Yemeni merchants that went to Indonesia and Malaysia and all the way to China. To meet, I remember having a classmate, Muhammad Shahim from Maldives, who was an amazing qari. And I remember him telling me, yeah, I mean we became Muslim literally because of merchants just showing up on our islands. And then Islam spread. So what was it about their character that they had that was enticing to people? I don't have a specific person in mind, but I would like that person to be on the relay race. As far as knowledge and kind of the power of debate and dialogue and ability to convince each others, I'd say the last two rungs of the race, which are usually the hardest for a relay. I'm going to go with one contemporary and one classical. I'm going to go with Sheikh Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani. May Allah have mercy on him. If anybody has listened to his tapes, especially where he debates and dialogues with people, you can tell that he has a very ignited mind that is able to very cogently, but also very compassionately deal with people that have differing opinions, and being well grounded in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a plus there for getting people to the truth. And then classically, it's going to be Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And that's because as far as the immenseness of his intellect, like Sheikh al-Albani, he is convincing on the philosophical and more of the theoretical side. And so looking into the deeper meanings of Islam, and what the theological and philosophical implications of that are really interesting as well. So that would be my hodgepodge team.
Amazing, mashallah. That's an amazing story of people. I haven't actually heard that combination before. But yeah, Jazakallah khair once again, Chef Joe, for coming on to the podcast. To the viewers, we hope you all benefited, inshallah. And we hope to see you again next week for the next episode. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.